Okay, we're live.
Good evening and welcome to this month's meeting of the DC Public Charter School Board. I'm Jim Sandman. I serve as Vice Chair of the board and I'll be chairing this evening's meeting. I'd like to welcome my fellow board members, Treasurer Carissa Stanley Beatty, Secretary Shakura Adamafanian, and Board Member Leah Cruzy. The theme of our meeting tonight is Looking Back, Planning Ahead. This is a good time to reflect on the first half of the school year. Over the past several months, the board has dedicated significant time to focusing on key elements of our work: academic accountability, financial oversight, governance, and operational practices. Oversight is at the core of what we do. Our oversight is aimed at ensuring that every school has the conditions necessary for students to succeed. This first half of the school year, we've been examining and considering how our actions can best strengthen the schools under our oversight. The insights we've gained are helping us to refine our oversight and more clearly surface opportunities for improvement in the months ahead. As we reflect on and prepare for 2026, our work ahead, strengthening and supporting schools, ensuring strong governance, is critical. I'm confident that with the dedication and expertise of our school leaders, alongside the commitment of this board and our professional staff, we will continue to make meaningful and lasting progress. Thank you. Dr. Walker Davis.
Thank you, Vice Chair Sandman, for those thoughtful remarks. As we reflect on the first half of the school year, it's clear that this has been a period of focused and careful learning, designed to help both the board and the public better understand our approach and the work that we do. Across the sector, we are closely examining trends, patterns, and emerging needs so that we can respond more effectively and strategically. This learning is already guiding our next steps, helping us identify areas for improvement and positioning the sector for a strong finish to the school year. To support this work, we leveraged opportunities before the DC Council to highlight our efforts to strengthen the review and renewal process. We celebrated the innovative approaches adult education schools are bringing to the city and identified areas where additional support is needed, whether for students with disabilities, academic achievement, or addressing chronic absenteeism. These engagements also allow us to advocate for the resources schools need to better serve their students. I also want to acknowledge an important and difficult update in our sector. Capitol Village Public Charter School has voluntarily relinquished its charter, which is its contract with this board, and will close at the end of this school year. We will officially read the relinquishment into the record next month. But I'll say that decisions like this are never easy. They carry the real weight for students, families, educators, and school leadership. I've been in close contact with the Capitol Village's board and executive director, and I know that they have thought long and hard about this decision, and they made it with deep care and thought for the students' best interest at heart. In the meantime, the school's leadership has acted quickly and compassionately to support families. They've notified the school community and begun one-on-one conversations with each family to help them identify strong options for next year. We're encouraged that their 8th grade families were able to participate in this past weekend's EdFest, and that students in grades 5 through 7 will have another opportunity to explore school options at this coming weekend's Pre-K-8 EdFest. I will now just turn to what we will be doing to focus on our planning for the future. So this evening, we will discuss 2 items that are particularly forward-looking: a roundtable on our proposed mergers and acquisition policy, and a staff proposal to implement a grace and acclimation period for SY 26-27 for Aspire as the city prepares to transition to a new assessment for grades 3 through 8 and high school. These discussions will allow us to apply what we've learned to refine oversight, support schools, and ensure that students continue to have high-quality learning experiences. I look forward to those discussions tonight and to continuing our work together to support schools, students, and families across the district. And as this is our last meeting of the calendar year, I just want to pause and say how grateful I am for the dedication, collaboration, and heart that this board brings to our work. Our schools and the educators, students, and families in them show us every day what's possible when we lead with purpose and care. So with winter break and the holiday season right around the corner, I hope each of us find a little time to rest, recharge, and celebrate the people and communities that keep us going. I'm looking forward to what we'll continue to accomplish together in the new year for DC students. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Walker Davis. At the beginning of every board meeting, the DC Public Charter School Board hears public testimony related to items on the agenda and listens to testimony on topics not related to any agenda items. Each speaker will have 2 minutes to speak. If you need to make additional points, please email your testimony for us to read to public.comment@dcpcsb.org. Public officials who sign up to testify will be allowed to speak for up to 5 minutes. The hand-raising feature has been disabled. All written public comment is available to the public on our website. If you would like to register to provide live testimony or submit a written comment to the board, you can find all testimony registration and submission information on our website under the Public Comment tab at dcpcsb.org. You can also submit your comments to public.comment@dcpcsb.org or call our public comment line to leave a voicemail testimony at 202-328-2660 and select option 2. As we move through each speaker, Jonah, our Zoom host for the evening, will promote each speaker from the attendee pool and unmute individuals speaking. We have 11 individuals who signed up to speak this evening. I'd like to invite them to testify before the board. Our first public comment will be from Isis Culver. You have 2 minutes to speak.
Hello and good evening. My name is Isis Culver, a proud member of CDC's class of 2027. After I graduate, I am considering enrolling at the California Institute of Art to study stage management. I'm here because I want to share my SEED experience with you. I decided to enroll because of its unique boarding model. As the second oldest of many siblings, I truly craved the independence, and thankfully my mom was incredibly supportive of my choice to be away from home. The boarding model is what made SEED special. It creates a community where we are forced to build independence and maturity required for college and life. SEED matters to me because it gives me a lot of opportunities other schools wouldn't. It pushes me to help myself and do more. I am more active and I have achieved a lot of great things. My favorite part about being a SEED student is the robust support system, particularly the facility. My teachers, especially the college counseling staff, have helped me advance emotionally and mentally. They have guided me since 9th grade, ensuring I've always had a clear path towards my goals. Here, I've also developed the core values of resilience and patience. For example, being thousands of miles away forces you to grow, like when I traveled to Greece in 9th grade and participated in the 3-week language and culture exchange to Japan. These challenges forced me to adapt and even helped me get better at expressing myself when I'm uncomfortable. Now I'm in my junior year and looking forward to my next steps. SEED is preparing me and my peers for college life and beyond. This shows up in the college level coursework I tackle throughout school. Outside of classes, I'm busy learning sign language, managing our go-go band, and serving as a SEED ambassador. The exposure to the theater program is what made me choose the career path for stage management. Finally, I want to thank the staff, specifically Dr. Bagley. He gave me a lot of opportunities. He pushed me to do a lot more and not just the bare minimum. He helped me realize that I want to do stage management and theater. Because of him, I want more than just a basic job. The one message I hope you remember that is, although SEED has its ups and downs, they really care about helping students. They really care about second chances and helping us succeed. Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much, Ms. Culver. Our next speaker is Janice Carroll. Ms. Carroll, you have 2 minutes.
Good evening. I'm Janice Carroll, the Positive Behavior Intervention Supports Coordinator at the Seed Public Charter School of Washington, D.C. Tonight, I want to share the why behind my dedication. This dedication began with a story I saw over a decade ago. Since watching the 60-minute story on Seed in 2010, I have been a believer in its mission and goals. I knew that I wanted to work at a place where I could support first-generation students with their goals of graduating from high school, enrolling in college, and obtaining a college degree. Over the years, I've worked in various capacities. I started as a resident advisor in the dormitories in 2011, where I oversaw a house of incoming sixth graders. This initial role gave me an in-depth view on why SEED's boarding component is truly an important and unique aspect of the SEED model. For example, I worked with young women, some of whom I still see from time to time, who deeply appreciated having a safe space away from challenges at home, such as food and housing insecurity, or environments that made it hard to sleep peacefully. In those dorms, I saw how a place like SEED provides mentorship, support, and encouragement from caring adults. I saw SEED as a safe haven that could nurture the minds and build social skills in the students so that they could live in the world beyond high school. As I moved up through various positions from building support assistant to student life counselor, cohort lead, dean, and now a positive behavior intervention supports coordinator, I heard from parents who relied on the resources, collaboration, and supports SEED provides to encourage their children's growth. A recent example that highlights the power of our boarding model is the success of our Soul of Seed band and our feature in the Washington Post. The students discussed how our boarding model is integral to their achievement. The community of caring is another added value to the CDC culture, and our administrators regularly step into the classroom to support our teachers. We have resident advisors that go above and beyond, providing critical support to students during difficult times, such as helping a child successfully transition back to school after being displaced by a fire. We have leadership that works hard to ensure our parents' voices are heard weekly. We have deans that students identify as a trusted adult that they can talk to, and counselors that truly care about the mental well-being of our students. Being in an environment of such compassion and growth against the odds gives me the inspiration that I need to continue my work at SEED. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak, and I apologize for going a little over the time limit, but I'm very passionate about what we do here, and thank you again for giving us the forum to speak.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Carroll. Your passion is very evident. Thank you for your dedication. Our next public speaker is Alexis Holloway. Ms. Holloway, you have 2 minutes.
Hello, my name is Alexis Holloway, and I currently serve as the data specialist at CDC. I've been working at SEED for the past 10 years, and I'm also honored to be a graduate of SEED, class of 2010. I wanted to speak today because of how special a place SEED is to me. 21 years ago, Leslie Poole visited my elementary school and spoke about this boarding school not far from where I lived. I went home and asked my mom to apply for me to attend the school. She did, but I was placed on the wait list. In 2005, with less than 8 weeks left of the school year, I was pulled from the wait list, and I've been a SEED Falcon ever since. I made lifelong friends. I traveled the world. I graduated second in my class and became a first-generation college student. I graduated from college in May of 2015, and right after, I was applying for jobs. SEED reached out to me and offered a summer job at the front desk, which I gladly accepted. I ended up staying at the front desk for the next 6 years, and in that position, I was able to share my story, rave about SEED, and help students who had a similar experience and background as me. I accounted so much at the front desk, but I believe SEED's mission and my belief in it kept me and continues to keep me pushing forward. The mission is to prepare students for success in college and beyond. SEED truly lives out his mission with graduates like Antoine Coward, class of 2006, who has both his bachelor and master degrees and now is the CEO of District Cryo and sits on our foundation board. And also with current students like Isis Culver, who not only thrives as a junior, but who participated this past summer in Experiment Abroad, Japan. CDC prepares graduates like Antoine and current students like Isis by making sure they have the courses they need to graduate, providing opportunities outside of the classroom to grow and glow, and teaching them the importance of college. My favorite part of SEED is the community and feeling of family. As a student, I was always told that I had a village, and now as a staff member, I partake in being a part of our scholars' villages. CDC matters not only because of its mission, but because of that village I mentioned. It's a place for students to have that feeling of belonging, gain that pre-college experience, and try new things like theater or study abroad. If CDC didn't exist, that young girl from Southeast DC wouldn't have traveled to India in the summer of 2008, wouldn't have graduated cum laude from college, and she probably wouldn't be helping other young girls from Southeast DC today. I need CDC. We need CDC. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Holloway. Our next speaker is Elvin Jusu. Did I pronounce your name correctly? You're on mute.
Hello, my name is Evelyn Jasu. And I am the mother of an 11th grade scholar, Nigel, who joined CDC in the 10th grade. I wanted to speak today because of the change I've seen in my son. His confidence, the independence, and the hope that he now has for the future is directly because of CDC. I chose CDC because Nigel needed more than what was previously given to him in another school. He struggled academically. He didn't have support from his teachers, and he had no confidence to ask for help. He had one friend and he felt isolated. And he wasn't excited about school or the future. When the basketball coach, Coach Joe Thompson, told me about CDC, I decided to take the chance. And it became the best decision I have made. The boarding program, the small classes, and the way teachers truly care and transformed him. Nigel went from a child who didn't like school at all to a young man who advocates for himself, makes friends easily, and believes in his own abilities. Teachers didn't just tell him he could do it. They showed him how in multiple ways until he believed it too. C's mission is real in our lives. Nigel once feared boredom because of things he was told, but now he says his teachers at C's is the best he has ever had. He feels safe. He sees that the questions that he has matters, and the structure has prepared him not only for college, but for living independently. One of the best blessings was when Anshe Toe introduced herself to and explained about the college readiness program, from tours to advising. It opened his eyes to the possibilities of never like what he never imagined. The biggest change I've seen in his independence and the belief that he can go to college and succeed. Seeds brings something powerful to DC, educational landscape, the opportunities are unmatched. My son traveled to Athens, Greece, experienced a different culture, and came home with a broadened worldview, something I could have never given him on my own. My favorite part of Seed community is the energy of the students, the games, the plays, the families coming together. It truly feels like a family. In closing, I want the board to just know that CDC matters. It changes lives just because of the students, not just for the students, but the families and the community. Losing this program would be a tremendous loss to DC. If you can remember one thing from today's, I would like you to know that C doesn't just prepare the children for college, C prepares them for life. And my son is living proof. Thank you for your time and truly listening.
Thank you, Ms. Jesu. Your pride in Nigel is wonderful to see. Thank you for your testimony tonight.
Thank you.
Our next listed speaker is Monique Joshua. Is she in the waiting room?
Marique is not in attendance tonight. I don't see her in the waiting room, Jim.
Okay. Our next speaker is Shannon Hodge. Good evening, Ms. Hodge. Welcome. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your commitment to clarity, transparency, and thoughtful sector planning. I'm here to share an example from our city's history that shows what the right policy can do for students. In 2013, Options PCS was in crisis. The school served some of the city's most vulnerable young people, 68% with disabilities, most receiving level 4 services, many experiencing homelessness or instability. DC PCSB warned that closing the school without a strong plan could deeply disrupt students and send ripple effects across the city. I supported the Options court-appointed receiver. From that vantage point, I saw firsthand what it took to stabilize the school and ensure continuity and safety for its students. The solution that ultimately worked did not come from a pre-qualified school. It came from a new operator, one built specifically around the needs of the learners Options served. That path wasn't in any playbook. It emerged through careful oversight, transparency, creativity, and a commitment to doing what students needed in that moment. The school that emerged, Kingsman Academy PCS, would not have been eligible under the proposed mergers and acquisitions policy. It did not yet exist. 11 years later, Kingsman stands as proof of what is possible when the authorizer keeps all tools available in service of students. Earlier this year, Kingsman met or exceeded all of its charter goals during its 10-year charter review, an outcome rooted in an acquisition process that required flexibility, not pre-qualification. If the proposed M&A policy had been in place in 2014, the solution that delivered stability, belonging, and high-quality programming for some of DC's highest need students simply would not have been available. My request is straightforward. Preserve a narrow but essential space for creative, student-centered solutions in moments of crisis. Emergencies rarely fit neatly into predefined criteria. A decade ago, flexibility, paired with rigorous oversight, allowed DC PCSB to protect students during an unprecedented situation. That same flexibility must remain available today so that when students most need us to act, we are not constrained by structures that cannot anticipate every scenario. Thank you for your consideration and for your continued commitment to the students and families of DC.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hodge. Our next speaker is Vincent Alexis Leona. Mr. Alexis Leona, you have 2 minutes.
Good evening, members of the board and staff. My name is Vincent Alexis Leona, and I'm here representing my team at Education Forward DC. I want to express our support for the mergers and acquisitions policy. This policy gives LEAs clear guidance upfront about the criteria and process for pursuing a merger or acquisition, while also promoting transparency and consistency for both schools and PCSB. I also want to urge the board to retain all 3 pathways within the policy: mergers, standard acquisitions, and emergency acquisitions. During the public hearing, some board members raised concerns about keeping the emergency acquisition pathway, suggesting that schools that plan well and are forward-thinking shouldn't need it. However, as staff noted, the goal is for this policy to be evergreen, designed to meet schools' needs for years to come. We can't fully anticipate the challenges or disruptions that may arise, so retaining the emergency acquisition option ensures schools have a tool to respond if unexpected circumstances occur. The past 5 years have shown us that unforeseen events such as the pandemic or major federal policy changes can have a significant impact on our schools, making it impossible to predict when additional options may be necessary. We hope the final policy will give schools the flexibility to innovate and respond to ongoing challenges such as under-enrollment or stagnant results. A wider set of options strengthens the overall ecosystem, allowing schools to pursue new approaches while recognizing that not all situations can be anticipated. Finally, I want to thank PCSB staff and board members for all of their work in bringing this policy to fruition. I know it's been a long process with extensive feedback carefully considered. Our hope is that this policy will ultimately serve as a tool to reduce disruption, support thoughtful scenario planning, and enable the sector to be more nimble and responsive moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alexis Leona. Our next speaker is Tracy White.
So, Jim, Tracy has declined to to join us as a panelist? Oh, wait, she put her hand up. Hold on, she's coming back. One sec.
Hello, good evening. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Ms. White. Welcome.
All right, good evening. Good evening, members of the DC Public Charter Schools Board, Dr. Walker Davis and the team. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Dr. Tracy White, and for nearly 30 years, I have had the privilege of serving the students and families and adults of Washington, D.C., both as a former administrator for DC Public Schools, and then for the last 16 years, I'm working in the charter sector. My perspective today comes from decades of leading schools through improvement, stabilization, and systems level transformation. I so appreciate the board's intention in creating mergers and acquisitions policy, and also Hannah's leadership in doing this work. And because we all want the same thing, which is to make sure that we end up with a policy that protects students and ensures strong stewardship. But there are several elements of the draft of the policy that require deeper refinement to make sure that we're able to fully support and see successful school transitions. And so the first point that I want to raise is that eligibility needs to be grounded in demonstrated performance over time and not just a single year of an Aspire rating as it was previously written in the draft policy. A one-year score, particularly a rolled up Aspire score, does not capture the long-term capacity of an LEA. And we know that year-over-year trends tell the real story of instructional stability, leadership quality, financial stability, and ultimately organizational health. So using that single Aspire rating as an eligibility gate does not meet that sufficiency requirement. Second, Aspire scores alone, even at level 1 or 2, may mask significant variation in the school's ability to serve specific populations, particularly if they have small percentages of populations of students who have unique learning needs. For an example, an LEA may perform reasonably well overall, but have limited success with English learners and students with disability or other high needs groups, kind of as Shannon has shared, which then could impact the organization's ability to serve students who are coming from either the merged school or the acquired school. The policy should also include a realistic hold harmless period, because when an LEA assumes responsibility for a school, it inherits long-standing academic, operational, and potentially cultural challenges that take time to address. Fourth, financial readiness should be evaluated with a more nuanced perspective and approach than just the FAR score alone, especially if the school is to absorb the liabilities of the school that they're either merging with or acquiring. And then finally, it's thinking about enrollment building, and that has got to come with a clear and realistic runway. Many of the schools that may need to be merged or acquired may have already had pre-existing challenges with enrollment. And so giving the acquiring or the merging school time to rebuild enrollment is something that's really critical. Closing, at its core, the mergers and acquisition process is not transactional, it's transformational. And Shannon spoke to that. And because it's transformational, I would urge the board to center the lived experience of LEA leaders who've done this work, who understand the complexity of school culture, special populations, human capital, community engagement, and instructional redesign that's necessary to turn around schools and organizations. Thank you for your time this evening, and happy holidays. I can't hear you, Mr. Sandman.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. White. Happy holidays to you. Our next speaker is Ann Herr. Welcome. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
Absolutely. Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to offer public comment tonight. My name is Ann Herr, and I'm the Senior Director of School Development and Accountability at the DC Charter School Alliance. I'll be speaking tonight about the mergers and acquisition policy. This is an important policy, and we have a few observations and recommendations. First, we encourage PCSB to adopt a broad decision-making framework grounded in authorizing best practices rather than a highly prescriptive policy. The framework should communicate what factors DCPCSB will consider in making decisions, but allow latitude to deal with unanticipated situations. Second, we think the merger pathway is very unlikely to be used. There's no evidence that the schools that meet the criteria to merge are interested in merging, and we think the schools most likely to explore a merger aren't eligible. Third, the current timelines aren't designed to facilitate thoughtful planning. It should be clear from the policy when DCPCSB will respond at each step. Schools should have more time to complete the application after a letter of intent is approved, and DCPCSB should have more time to evaluate the application before making a decision. The approval process should be finalized by the December lottery opening, but should allow more time in the approval phase and less time in the planning phase. Fourth, the emergency acquisition pathway doesn't address actual emergencies. It is highly tied to the review and renewal cycle and does not address situations arising at other times and for other reasons, such as enrollment shortfalls or other situations of financial distress. It's unclear what would happen if an emergency arose after February 1st. DCPCSB has indicated that one of the driving forces behind this policy is declining school age enrollment, the idea that small schools may have to combine to address this reality. However, we see little in this policy that will encourage schools to explore combining, and we anticipate that schools will continue to see these pathways as a last resort. We are really glad that you're convening an expert panel, and we're looking forward to tonight's discussion. Thank you very much for considering these comments, and we're happy to follow up on any of them. Good night.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Fer. Our next speaker is Valerie Jablow.
Valerie should be joining via phone.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can. Welcome, Ms. Jablow.
Thank you. I am Valerie Jablow, a DC education analyst. Last month, I submitted written testimony on the Charter Board's proposed mergers and acquisitions policy, which you have posted and reviewed. I want to underscore some points of it and other public testimony that do not appear to have been taken into consideration in the Charter Board's summation of that commentary for this meeting. For instance, parent Lorena Flores asked that this policy not center on mergers and acquisitions mainly or solely as a financial exercise. As this policy currently stands, it is entirely from the vantage of what charter operators want, students and money, and it was apparently formulated without any direct input from families or teachers. As I noted, families and teachers often are the last to know of problems that lead to potential closures and thus mergers and acquisitions. Those problems are often unheralded or treated as private business matters. You can make a difference in that by informing parents and teachers directly at each school of any financial or other problems, ensuring that all charters follow the Open Meetings Act, and including parent and teacher reviews as well as student treatment in all your oversight. I also noted that the definition of emergency in this policy advantages charter operators for whom the fiscal and other arrangements of a merger and/or acquisition can appear to solve budgetary problems as well as capitalize on market share when the merger occurs after the lottery. All of that is a grave disservice to families who deserve to know well ahead of any action why it is being proposed and how, and to have the option of entering the lottery before anything becomes an emergency. If family and teachers know what you know about financial or other distress when you know it, and that seems too risky to a charter's fortunes, examine what is being prioritized by not informing families and teachers. The DC students you are supposed to serve or private nonprofits. Making those changes to this policy and in your oversight would allow families to take charge before they are in a position where they feel like they have no choice whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Jablow. Our final speaker tonight is Erica Harrell. Welcome. Did I pronounce your name correctly? You're on mute. There you go.
Yeah, yes, okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you fine. Thank you. Please
Great.
go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair and members of the board. My name is Erica Harrell, and I serve as the Executive Director of Elect Ed DC, an education advocacy organization rooted in Ward 7 and 8, committed to ensuring every child in DC has equitable access to a high-quality public education. Tonight, I want to speak briefly about about what families east of the river continue to tell us they need and what students deserve. In this moment of transition within DC, we need to make sure that our board maintains strong accountability and a clear focus on quality, particularly for schools serving Ward 7 and 8. It's more important now than ever. Families need the assurance that regardless of internal changes, the standard for excellence does not shift. First, families want high quality neighborhood options that meet their children's full academic potential. In our latest polling, voters overwhelmingly affirm that high quality public education is a right, yet only 28% believe that Ward 7 and 8 currently have enough high quality school options. This gap between belief and lived experience is shaping how families think about school quality, leadership, and the future of their communities. And despite this frustration, there's also a strong demand for innovation. 80% of voters east of the river support the creation of a language immersion school beyond elementary school, including 51% who strongly support it. Families want programs that allow their children to thrive without commuting 60 to 90 minutes across the city. Second, families and communities want safe, well-resourced environments. Concerns about housing costs and rising prices and neighborhood safety and crime remain the top issues on people's minds. So these pressures only heighten the need for strong local school options that support students' academic and emotional well-being. And third, families and communities want innovation grounded in real community demand. Elected's work and the convenings we lead through our sister organization, the EAT Foundation, focus on understanding how students learn and ensuring that children, especially those whose strengths often go unseen, receive early appropriate support. Our community has been clear. They want more schools that reflect their children's full brilliance. And tonight we urge the board to continue prioritizing accountability, equity, and the expansion of high quality, community-driven programs, especially the language immersion path that families and communities east of the river overwhelmingly support. Families and communities have told us what they need, and we are asking you to help make it real. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify tonight.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Thank you to all of our speakers this evening. This concludes the public comment portion of our agenda. We'll now move to the public meeting portion of our agenda, and I move to approve the December 8th, 2025 board meeting agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Secretary Adamafanian, would you call the roll, please?
Excuse me. Vice Chair Sandman,
Aye.
Treasurer Stanley Beatty,
Aye.
Board Member Crucy,
Aye.
and I am an aye as well, Chair. Sorry, Vice Chair.
Thank you very much. Next on our agenda, we have a charter amendment request from Harmony DC Public Charter School. I'll yield the floor to Bijan Lane, who is the specialist in the sector planning and compliance school performance department. Bijan will introduce the request. I'd also like to invite representatives from the school to provide remarks if you could promote them to panelists.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Bijan Lane, and I am a specialist in the school performance department. DC PCSB staff recommends its board to vote to approve Harmony DC Public Charter Schools' request to relocate from 62 T Street Northeast to 2917 H Street Northeast ahead of school year 2026-27. If the board has any further questions, representatives from the school are available to answer them. Thank you.
School representatives, is there anything you'd like to present to the board?
Good evening. We don't have anything to present at this time.
Okay. We recall your presentation last month, so thank you for that. Colleagues, I'll now entertain a motion.
I move to approve the charter amendment request of Harmony DC Public Charter School and approve the DC PCSB Board Vice Chair to sign the amendment on the board's behalf.
Is there a
Second.
second? Secretary Anabafanian, would you please call the roll?
Vice Chair Sandman,
Aye.
Treasurer Stanley Beatty,
Aye.
Board Member Leah Cruzy,
Aye.
and I am an aye as well, Vice Chair.
Thank you. Your charter amendment is approved. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Next on our agenda, we have a few discussion items. First, we're going to have a roundtable discussion on the proposed mergers and acquisitions policy. For that, I'd like to ask Dr. Michelle Walker-Davis to kick us off and explain what we'll be doing this evening. Dr. Walker-Davis.
Thank you, Vice Chair Sandman. This evening, we will hold a roundtable discussion on the proposed policy regarding mergers and acquisitions. Joining our expert panel tonight are Julie Squire, Senior Partner and Head of Emerging Approaches at Bellwether, David Greenberg, Vice President of Learning and Development at the National Association for Charter School Authorizers, or NACSA, Dr. Jessica Sutter, the former president of the DC State Board of Education, and she also did her doctoral dissertation in charter school closures and acquisitions. And I will also be joined by Hannah Cousineau, who you know very well, our Director of Sector Planning and Compliance at DC PCSB. Tonight's roundtable will be an opportunity for robust public deliberation on the proposed policy, and we look forward to leveraging the expertise and perspectives of our panelists. The goals are to address the public comment and feedback that we've received to date, to present national research and best practices that our panelists will offer, and also to show our thought process in developing the policies. It's important to share, particularly for the public, that the board is not voting on this policy tonight. This will be on our agenda at the January 2026 board meeting, where the board will have an opportunity to vote on the policy. We fully expect to hear questions from you as a board. As I said, this will be an opportunity to connect what you've heard in public comment to date with our panelists. We really appreciate the feedback that we've received thus far. We've incorporated that wherever we can in the policy draft, and we look to continue to hear both the questions from our board tonight, as well as any of the commentary that we've heard yet this evening, and up until when we bring the policy back for final proposal to the board next month. So to kick off the roundtable, I would like to invite each of the panelists to introduce themselves and share a little bit about their experiences with mergers and acquisitions before we turn it over to the board for questions. Hannah, why don't you get us started while the panelists are being pulled up for the conversation?
Hello, good evening, board. My name is Hannah Cousineau, and I am the author of the proposal for this policy. I also lead the team responsible for charter amendments, which include asset acquisitions, enrollment ceiling increases, grade reconfigurations, all things that have pertinence and relevance to this policy before us today.
I'm sorry, could you have, panelists raise their hand? I don't have a list of the panelists. I apologize. If they would raise their hand, I can bring them up.
Yep,
The names are
see
Julie Squire. Go ahead.
Juliet Squire, you should see her in our attendee pool. Jessica Sutter. Yep. And I don't see David.
There he is.
Okay, great.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to ask board members to pose questions to each of our experts here. I'd like to start off myself by just laying the groundwork for others' questions and begin by asking Dr. Walker Davis if you could tell us the origins of this policy. What problem are we trying to solve here?
Yes, thank you for that question. So a couple of things. First, want to acknowledge that we have had the ability to oversee acquisitions for quite some time at PCSB, but we did not have a formal policy governing how we did that acquisition process. So on the one hand, this allows for us to have criteria in place and to articulate how we are going to look at acquisitions. So that's a technical response, but what we're really trying to respond to is to think about how our sector is changing. We know that as population forecasts for school-age children decline and that the city's conditions change, we believe that we should create the policies for thoughtful charter sector planning, and this is one such policy. We know that schools right now are considering a range of strategies to increase their sustainability, their efficiency, their quality. And we think that the merger and acquisition policy or mergers and acquisitions add to the mix of possible opportunities for solutions around economies of scale, grade progression, leadership transitions, and general continuity for students and teachers. As I mentioned, we have an acquisition. We've done acquisitions in the past, but there is no clear process for mergers. And we want to be able to articulate what our policies are around either of those approaches. And most importantly, I would say that this allows us to be future-oriented, to have future-oriented conversations, not to be responsive just in the moment, but particularly the merger pathway allows us to have schools have an environment which they could think about not tomorrow, but perhaps a year from now, 2 years from now, what it might look like to combine communities in some way. So those are the top line things that we're trying to address with this. And I know that one of the conversations has been about whether this policy is an alternate pathway to closure. This creates an opportunity for us to explore other options, but that is not the primary driver of this policy.
Can you describe the process that led to the creation of this policy? We have three experts here.
Yes.
What have you gone through?
Yes, thank you. So one, we did do extensive work with Bellwether, and you have Juliet Squire here who can speak a little bit about that process. But Bellwether has helped us do the research on who's doing mergers and acquisitions across our charter authorizers. They've looked at what are best practices in other jurisdictions. They've looked at the policy that we had or the practices and processes that we had in place. And they did outreach to our board members, outreach to sector leaders, and most importantly, outreach to school leaders to see what are the concerns that school leaders have and what might be the ways that we shape a policy that could be responsive to that. And so we did, as I said, extensive research, outreach, and then Bellwether supported us in pulling all of that feedback together, grounded in the guiding principles that we as an agency had about what does a successful merger need to look like, what are the factors that we would consider in terms of school quality. This policy addresses sort of the multi-stage approach that allows early feasibility studies with the schools and engaging families and staff meaningfully in the process. And then, like our charter application process, our process also looked at how do we ground our decision-making in a very rigorous and comprehensive standard for approval. So you will see that that is a consistent thread between this policy, our charter applications, and what will be renamed our school expansion policy, but which is currently our enrollment ceiling increase policy.
And can you tell us about the roles of Jessica and David?
Sure. So Jessica has done work with us. Dr. Sutter has done work with PCSB in the past around school closures and understanding and supporting that work on the back end here. David comes to us from NACSA and has brought the perspective of what is good authorizing in general, but what are some guidance and principles and practices that we should consider as we engage with any policy, but specifically around mergers and acquisitions. How do you align the best practices in authorizing with this policy to ensure that we are not creating a policy vehicle that is not going to result in the kind of high quality schools that we want to see on the other end?
Thank you. Hannah, how does this policy align with the requirements of the School Reform Act?
Thank you. So in this policy explicitly cites the School Reform Act, which states that the assets of a closing school may be transferred to another charter school in a transaction overseen by DCPCSB, so long that the acquiring school agrees to enroll the closing school's students. The School Reform Act ties together physical assets and student enrollment. This is the statutory basis for the mergers and acquisitions as defined in this policy. But as you heard Shannon Hodge, for example, reference tonight, there have been other examples of school consolidations, such as DCPS acquiring a closing charter school or DCPCSB chartering a new school to take over a closing one. These situations are beyond the current scope of this policy, and they may be subject to other processes and relevant laws. It may be helpful for us to add a clarifying footnote or other language to that effect. Jim, would you like me to talk about other laws as well, or do you want me just to talk about the School Reform Act?
Could you just elaborate on the last point you just made?
Yeah, I was trying to connect.
Are you saying that there will continue to be the possibility of alternative routes outside of this policy?
Yes, I think there are always situations that can come up. We grounded this policy in that statutory basis of the School Reform Act, as well as you'll hear Jess and Julie and David speak about some of the best practices in DC and in a national context as well. But we believe that a policy that is clear while still retaining some flexibility will serve this sector best. So long story short, yeah, there could still be situations that would just require some creativity on our part, on the part of the schools. And that's where conversations like these notice of explorations come into play so that we can think through the best course of action.
Let me give you a specific example. Could a situation like the one that Shannon Hodge described continue to happen after this, if this policy were adopted?
Yes, but to clarify, other processes like the new school charter application would come into play.
Thank you.
I would say, Vice Chair Salmon, we see this policy as creating more opportunity versus limiting opportunity. And it is to be able to be very transparent about the criteria and the circumstances that we would look at these scenarios, but it is not to close the door to any and all possibilities. And to Hannah's point, we do have policies and practices that govern how we look at new schools, for example. We have policies and practices that govern how we think about other forms of expansion. And so all of those would come into play. The goal here is not to limit flexibility that we already have or opportunity, but to be transparent about what could be possible with these new pathways in the policy that we've articulated.
Hannah, you suggested the idea of a footnote. Could you elaborate on that? It sounds like a good idea to me.
Yes, I think that we could add some easy language about how this policy is not exhaustive of all consolidation situations, and that there may be other processes, other relevant laws that come into play. And PCSB will work through those situations to develop the best course of action.
Thank you both.
Mhm.
Other board members, the floor is open for questions.
Vice Chair Salmon, I have a few questions. Thank you for actually starting with the question clarifying Ms. Hodges' testimony that if we were allowed to ask questions at public comment, I would have asked one there. Hannah, if you could, I understand your point about the footnote. It sounded like, and forgive me if this is too specific to Ms. Hodge, as I know she can't answer, but it sounds like she was speaking to obstacles that this policy would impose in its current iteration. So I'm going to ask you the question in that manner. Are there obstacles that that the proposed policy would impose in its current iteration?
I'm trying to be specific to that situation while also recognizing there are many other examples that could exist and things that we can't even, opine on today because we don't know what's going to happen.
And understanding, like you said, it would require a new charter application. I get that part.
Yeah.
And that is, in my opinion, that is not an obstacle. That's just a different policy, a different process. I'm asking specifically, does this iteration of the policy impose an obstacle?
I don't. Yeah. The policy assumes that the schools are existing and have already been chartered. And so that would be the obstacle that I believe she would be referencing.
Okay.
Whereas a new school, right, we still need to develop that charter agreement with them.
Okay. All right. So then that's the difference here, is that in that case, you needed to charter a new school. Okay, got it. Thank you for that. And then just a couple of other questions. This is also a follow-up from the testimony. There was comment, and I've read this. I think this is not unusual commentary, or we've talked about it before, but the idea of mergers and the criteria, the way that we've established it, can we just speak to the need for the merger criteria and the likeliness that it would be used? And maybe we can talk about it from what we think, and also perhaps from a best practice, because there's a reason why we included it.
I'm going to actually say a little bit, but I'll ask Julie to share sort of what you've learned and seen and how you've supported us in thinking about the merger pathway. So one, because of our past experience with acquisitions, they tended to be more like what we fleshed out in the emergency or responded to in the emergency acquisition pathway. They tended to reflect more of a schooling crisis and another school better position to support that school. And it is not that the acquisition process prohibited a merger, because technically and legally, the act that is happening is an acquisition using that SRA language, but we did not articulate a process where there could be a longer runway and a more thoughtful engagement with one or more, two or more LEAs around how they could combine for different reasons besides facing imminent closure. And so that is what is envisioned by this pathway, by this opportunity, and it is responsive to what we've heard, that schools are thinking about their long-term sustainability, and there are many factors that might be driving that, not financial instability, but perhaps thinking about a founder and how do we support the school moving beyond the founder and thinking about ways to join with leadership, or that this is a strong elementary school where families are thinking about feeder patterns and there isn't a formalized baked-in feeder pattern, so you might want to merge with a secondary school to be able to support that. And so we wanted to create opportunities for that kind of innovation that wasn't crisis-driven, that wasn't, because a school is facing imminent closure, but more of creating another opportunity to rethink this with existing school leaders versus our charter application process where we're bringing in new applicants to the ecosystem. But I will let Julie share a little bit about your learnings and your advice and counsel to us about mergers in general and how they could support the work of an ecosystem.
Sure. Yes. Thank you, Dr. Walker Davis. The merger part of the policy really emerged from two things. One is recognizing that there were situations where two schools coming together from positions of relative strength could actually build on each other's capacities, build on those strengths, and make, for lack of a better phrase, a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. And so we wanted to create the opportunity for that to be the case. Secondarily, and Dr. Walker Davis, you said a lot of this, but a few of the things that we heard in talking to sector leaders, LEA leaders, is that there were challenges that schools anticipated that might not be about academic performance or financial challenges, but were about leadership transitions or feeder patterns, enrollment feeder patterns, and that this mechanism of a merger could be a tool in the PCSB's toolbox to address those kinds of strategic questions that were separate and distinct from those that have been historically addressed through an acquisition.
Thank you for that. That actually makes perfect sense, especially the when you start thinking about using it to create a feeder pattern. That is what most resonates with me, which to me is more planning than it is sort of responsive or reactionary to some other thing, right? And then my other question, and maybe this is for you, Dr. Walker Davis, or staff, I wanted to speak to the point that one of the public commenters talked about as it related to the emergency pathway after, and I'm going to get the date wrong, but I think she said February 5th or February something. What would happen to a school that, let's say it was deemed an emergency for whatever reason because they were at risk of whatever, but it's after February 5th. What does that look like?
I first want to, well, Hannah, you can.
Well, actually,
I may have gotten the date wrong. I didn't write her.
No,
Fine.
it's February.
Something.
February 1st or sooner.
Okay.
Yes, that was a theme that came up in public comment. I actually would love to hear some of our other panelists' perspective on that. I know that Jess in particular had some thoughts for PCSB about how to respond to this public comment around, emergencies can happen whenever in the school year, and there might be a real need to pursue an emergency acquisition even after the My School Lottery deadlines, pass.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. And thank you to the board and to Dr. Walker Davis for having me tonight. As Dr. Walker Davis said, I had worked with PCSB on prior closures and acquisitions, and then the board and staff were kind enough to provide me with data to write a dissertation about it. So I know more about the Kingsman acquisition than perhaps I might have ever wanted to. On the question of emergencies, though, I think the question is rooted in the notion that it's hard by their very nature to schedule an emergency. And so when folks offer feedback about deadlines, I think those concerns are warranted. And one of the ideas that I shared with the team in preparing for this panel is the idea of keeping deadlines as dates from the notification of the existence of an emergency rather than a date certain on the calendar. So rather than saying by February 1st or sooner, you would say, once it's been determined that a school is experiencing an emergency and believes there may be a pathway for an acquisition, by X number of days, they will notify PCSB. Within X days following receiving a notification, PCSB will respond with the following, whether it's a acknowledgement of receipt and invitation for a board-to-board meeting or something of that nature. So I think you could still keep in place deadlines, but those deadlines would be dates from notification, dates by when PCSB would respond, dates when further action are warranted. And that way, whether the emergency happens in October or the emergency happens in December, that's still consistent. The other thing we talked about in that discussion was the question of what happens then with questions around like the My School DC lottery, concern for children and families having the maximum number of choices. And I think that everyone's concerns about that are warranted, and I share them. However, if an emergency happens at a time after the DC lottery is closing, that emergency is happening then. And the best that everyone can do is to take action as quickly as possible. So I think that those timeline deadlines would work in that place as well.
Thank you for that. That makes perfect sense. One of the other questions I had, and this actually relates also to some of the public testimony, and I think we talked about this, Dr. Walker Davis, in the first opportunity to comment. I guess it was in the last board meeting, but it was about definitions of certain terms. So for example, we use the term need, demand, goal attainment, and also specifically the one that catches my eye as key financial indicators, but we don't define them. I'm assuming, or I won't assume, what is the thought process behind that? Are we not defining them for the purposes of flexibility? How are we thinking about that? Because it came up in public comment as well.
Yeah, so in our current sector planning work, particularly when we're looking at the enrollment ceiling increases or even charter applications, we do use the concept of need and demand as we are asking schools to demonstrate their to articulate their request and as we talk about our standard of approval. So it is defined in our other policies, and we can carry that over for this. And again, we are thinking about the merger and acquisition policy as part of a suite of sector planning policies, like the charter application and the expansion, but we will carry those definitions over, particularly for need and demand. You also asked about KFIs, and there was another.
Yeah, it was need, demand. In the summary from the written comment or the public comment, we also included goal attainment, but I think they're all sort of part and parcel to each other. Specifically, the one I wanted to talk about and get more insight on was key financial indicators. And I think we talked about this in the last meeting as well.
Yeah, I think there is an opportunity to highlight or amplify specific, well, the key financial indicators are key because all of them matter. And I think there's an opportunity to highlight which ones carry greater weight for this particular policy. And so certainly we'll work with Will and the school finance team to make that a little bit clearer, if not in the policy or in the guidance and in the guidance associated with that. And then with respect to goal attainment, that is specific to how we assess the schools at the time of their review or renewal, and we can carry over the definition that we have in other policies about goal attainment to make that clearer in this policy as well.
Treasurer, I also just want to highlight that our definitions for need and demand, as reflected in other publications like our new school charter application guidelines, actually come from NACSA. And we have David here with us who helped develop those definitions. And so he could speak towards the reason why we emphasize those terms and the way that best authorizing practices use those terms.
That would be great. Yeah.
Sure, happy to speak to that. Yeah, when we talk about need, we really tend to talk about a couple of different things. One would be access to quality schools. So there could be an area of the city that just has no schools that are providing a quality education for kids, and so they need a better option. We also talk about need from the standpoint of types of options. So let's say there's not a Montessori school, or students don't have access to Montessori, or different kind of programmatic needs. And then, of course, there's just straight up number of seats or number of spots in a school. That's another kind of need. Demand is really about, do people actually want to go to this school, right? And so, yeah, I mean, both of these are critical for school viability at the end of the day. I mean, enrollment is the number one piece about viability, financial viability, and so that's really the framing there.
Thank you. That's it from me for now, Vice Chair Salmon.
Thank you. Other board members have questions?
Vice Chair Salmon, I have a few questions.
I just want to reiterate my appreciation for our expert guests joining us this evening. This has been really interesting to hear some back and forth, so I'm grateful for all the public comment and all of the submissions that have come in, as well as this discussion tonight. So I had two questions to start. There may be some follow-ups. I'd like to kind of double click on the assertion that the eligibility criteria is a bit restrictive. Some commenters have explained that the eligibility criteria are overly restrictive and that PCSB should allow for greater considerations for LEAs that earn a level 3 on Aspire. So at the board meeting, at the public hearing, excuse me, the board had asked staff to model eligibility under the proposed criteria. So perhaps it make the most sense to start with Dr. Walker Davis. Can you summarize that analysis? And I'd be grateful to hear from any one of the panelists who feel they can speak to it best on their sense of that level 3 question.
Yeah, I can start. I'm always excited to talk about Aspire. And in response to questions from the last board meeting, we did look at Aspire performance over the past 2 years and goal attainment for our alternative schools for school year 23-24. We're still looking at goal determinations for those schools for 24-25, but wanted to just share what we are learning. Again, you know that schools have access to their information, but we will be publishing Aspire performance in the spring here. So the merger policy pathway states that all the schools must achieve at least a level 3 for 2/3 of their campuses and frameworks to be eligible to merge. And so in school year 23-24, we had 47 of our 64 LEAs, or approximately 73% of them under Aspire, meet that criterion. And then in 24-25, we had 52 of our 63 LEAs, which is 83%, meet that criterion of at least Aspire level 3. We also have in the language that at least one of the schools in a merger has to achieve a level 1 or 2 on Aspire for 2/3 of their campuses or the frameworks that they use. And this is also the minimum eligibility criteria for schools to acquire another LEA. So when you think about those thresholds in 23-24, we had 25 of our LEAs, or about 39% of them, meet that level 1 or 2. And then for last school year's data, 24-25, we had 32 of 63 LEAs, which is slightly over half of them meet the threshold. So we feel pretty confident with the data that there are sufficient schools that would be able to access this, that this is not as limiting as perhaps it seems, and based on the analysis that we've done. And I did want to just speak a little bit about the Alternative Accountability Framework, or our AAF schools. The policy states that to participate in a merger, an AAF school must have substantially met their charter goals. And we have 4 of our 6 AAF schools, or about 67% of them, that have met that threshold of substantially meeting their goals. So I think for us, we feel that this is not as limiting, as I mentioned, as some may think. I think there are a couple of other criteria that I could also lift up. I think we asked in the merger policy for one of the AF schools in that merger to have fully met their goals. And so we have 2 of the 6 LEAs that have fully met their goals. And again, these are minimal eligibility criteria, as opposed, in our opinion, to being like restrictive. But the data bears out that we will have sufficient schools who meet the thresholds and could participate in any of these options if they decided to do so, or were interested in doing so.
And Dr. Walker Davis, I'm guessing
Um, Counterfactuals are difficult for lots of reasons. And among them, in this case, is different assessments, different years.
Yeah.
So it's not really possible to say in another scenario in a different circumstance would or would not have met the criteria we're laying out here.
I think you could look at our patterns over, it is, yes, we have a different accountability system. PMF is different than Aspire. But I think you could look back and say, generally, how did schools perform under our accountability framework then? We only have sort of 2 years to compare here. We did look at what would the year to year progress be, because we heard that as feedback, and we do have data that suggests that 42 of our LEAs evaluated under Aspire achieved a level 3 or higher in both years, and 21 of them received a level 1 or 2 in both years. So I think that the data for each year is also consistent with some patterns that we've seen year over year, and I believe that we could look at when our former accountability system was put in place and became sort of the predominant ways that we were assessing schools. What was the trend? Did a third of our schools meet the highest criteria? Did half of our schools meet the highest criteria? We would predict that that would be true also of Aspire, and that in the long run, we would have sufficient schools that would be eligible to participate in this versus limiting the number of schools that would participate.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. The panelist we have a pretty technical response and also very specific to our specific LEAs. From a kind of policy perspective from where you sit, which is not quite as close to it. Any thoughts? And to repeat the question, sorry, is about an assertion from some commenters that level 3 in Aspire is too restrictive.
I can speak to my own thoughts on the importance of having one school, especially in an acquisition that is approaching the process in a position of strength. That was a theme that came out in conversations that we had with other authorizers who had also pursued acquisitions. That it was important that one of the schools be very strong because of the capacity, the complexity of an acquisition process. I think speaking for myself and my own background in the charter school sector as a board member and as working in the authorizing office in New Jersey, I think I would tend to think about the worst possible outcome of a process like this is that an acquisition fails. And that a school that is struggling continues to struggle, but that a second school that sought to help that school also starts to struggle as a result. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind and try to mitigate the possibility of that outcome. You know, in the policy, as we were talking to other authorizers about their experience, that was one of the lessons that they raised up and advised us on as part of the process here.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
I'll add one thought to what Julie shared, because I think I'd echo all that she just shared, and say, overall in this policy, I really appreciate the needle that PCSB is trying to thread, which is being specific and detailed enough to allow for an equitable policy that gives LEAs an opportunity to understand the criteria on which PCSB will make decisions. And I think you have to leave enough flexibility to execute strong authorizer judgment and to lean in on other existing policies the board already has in place. So I think this question that you're getting in public feedback asks the board about sort of where the boundaries and parameters are of where the details of the policy still allow for authorizer judgment in cases that may not yet be contemplated or that may run just to the side of some criteria PCSB has set. The other thing I'll say is, going back to the Kingsman conversation, you have a unique opportunity to think about, in that particular case study. And I'll say it with my research hat on, when I wrote the case study on it, this was an existing LEA that was going to have to close, and a school that served a unique population of students for whom it was in the best interest of the city and the students for there to be another operator to provide the same set of services for the same set of students in the same location. There were no other operators available in the city who had that set of skills. So a new operator had to come in and apply. And in that case, you might see where this question is warranted from public comment. That operator was brand new. It had no track record. So where would it fit in there? It would go in your new school policy, an existing policy the board already has, and be approved under those circumstances. But it might not neatly meet the definitions that folks are bringing up in the policy here. So those are just my two additional thoughts: is authorizer judgment and places where policy exists in other spaces within PCSB for unique circumstances.
And I would also say, Board Member Cruzy, that it was important for us to signal to Dr. Sutter and Ms. Squire's point, like what our expectations are around academic performance. But I want to go back to Dr. White's testimony earlier today. We know that academic performance is not the only factor that makes a merger successful. Obviously, this comes with deep review of the financial standing of a school, deep review of their compliance track record as well. But it is important to us that we signal, particularly as we have a new accountability system that names what we think satisfactory performance is, exemplary performance, where that fits into this particular policy. And to the points made earlier, we don't want to set schools up for a harder time through this acquisition process. But if one school is much stronger academically, we would hope that they would be able to bring that learning and that stance to this new school.
Okay, that was enormously helpful. Thank you very, very much. I want to, my second question is around, we're fortunate in DC to have a really diverse sector of choice options, some of which are large multi-campus LEAs, and some of which are very unique, very small campuses. I serve and I am supportive of the concept of charter schools because I am motivated by the idea of governance being closer to student success. So for me, the size of a school is not an indication of its quality or right to exist. And I'm glad that families in DC have a rich array of choices from which to choose. So I think Dr. Sutter, you mentioned something about kind of equitable approach to this. Can any one of you, and perhaps we start with Dr. Sutter, speak to how the policy could, or what we should keep keeping in mind in wherever we land with the final policy to make sure we don't unintentionally disadvantage smaller or single site schools?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Representative Cruzy. I think one of the ways to think about the equity here is, and I worry I'm going to sound like a broken record, but is leaning in on this, maintaining flexibility for authorizer judgment. I think that the merger pathway actually offers an interesting option for smaller LEAs to lean in as combining forces to provide something greater, as Julie said, greater than the sum of their parts, a way to facilitate economies of scale from the ground up, rather than by having a larger entity acquire a smaller entity, but two small entities teaming together could create economies of scale. But I think that not too narrowly defining the parameters of the criteria to edge out or be so narrow as to exclude small LEAs is really important here. Years ago, there was an effort to pull together a series of smaller LEAs that are language immersion schools to create a unique feeder pattern pathway. I don't know what might come up in the imaginations of LEA leaders or their boards, but I think that leaving space for that kind of authorizer judgment and leaning in on opportunities is really important so that both boards and staff of smaller schools can bring creative solutions to the authorizer, even if they don't currently fit the definitions you all have outlined. So that's my most generous thought on how to do that, is to make space for the imagination of the LEA leaders who created these unique small schools in the first place.
If I may add to
Please.
that a little bit, and this doesn't relate directly to mergers and acquisitions. You know, there's dozens of mergers and acquisitions that have happened, not hundreds, right, in the charter school space. Um, about 8 years ago, NACSA did some research about authorizing practice broadly, and Jessica has really highlighted this idea of judgment. And we learned that some of the best authorizers with some of the strongest portfolios of schools leaned into judgment. They had, of course, policies, they had tools to support their decision making, but they were just that, right? They were tools that gave them some parameters, some ways to think about things, but really leaned into their judgment. These tools assisted them and did not dictate, the answers. And so I just want to underscore what Jessica just said, because I think, the research from our experience really plays that out, that judgment matters.
I'll weigh in to both agree with David and Jessica, and to add that I think, I think judgment for authorizers is very important. You can only anticipate so many eventualities or contingencies in a policy, and you have to remain flexible to be able to respond to the situations that arise in a very dynamic and diverse charter sector. I do think one of the things that is an important flip side to judgment is transparency. And that's where I think this policy can be really helpful to smaller LEAs, simply by having a policy in place, having transparency about what the process is, will allow more people to consider participating in it. So making it overt, having it on the website, having this conversation with you all, I think is all part of bringing more people into the conversation, more LEAs. The second thing I'll say is that one of the things in the policy that I hope addresses this as well is the standard acquisition timeline. I think one of the things that we heard is that often when an acquisition is happening on an accelerated timeline, it can be very hard for a small LEA that might have a limited central office or team in place to be able to move quickly on that kind of an opportunity. But when you have a standard acquisition in place that might take place over 18 months, that allows more people to participate in the process as well. And then the third thing I'll say that I think is also reflected in the policy on this point is what Hannah raised earlier and David weighed in on as well, which is this issue of demand. And I think this is part of sector planning for the DC PCSB, is when considering a merger to not just look at the need in a community, but look for the demand for a particular model and the value of that model to that community. And I think that the way that that demand piece is built into the policy creates the window for the PCSB to take that into account as well.
This is really helpful. And I think what you're reminding me of is it's about wherever we can land, the right place is where the conditions, we're setting the best conditions for the best outcome for students. And knowing that we can't necessarily anticipate all the particulars. And part of the charter school model is to be responsive and foster the opportunity for creative solutions. Thank you very much for that. I'll yield the floor, Vice Chair Salmon.
Other questions?
Yep, thank you, Vice Chair. Good evening, Jessica, Juliet, and David. Thank you again for your work in supporting us to think through this and just being here tonight. I want to revisit emergency acquisitions. We heard a lot of testimony about it. And I think in everyone's question, there was a nod to it as well. And so kind of just want to have a direct conversation about that. What we've heard or the debate about the pathway is that folks again just feel like the proposed policy is too restrictive, following the theme that we just left in terms of just the policy in general, flexibility, allowance for flexibility and creativity. And folks really do feel like there should be flexibility to receive emergency requests even after the proposed deadline. And I believe, Julia, you spoke to that a little bit earlier. And then others believe the pathway should be used infrequently. If you could just name again sort of your thinking, and you alluded to this earlier, but just for the record, just naming really explicitly your thinking on that for everyone present, and then just any additional thoughts about the emergency acquisitions and things that we ought to think about. And any of the panelists, you all are welcome to jump in.
I mean, I can start just by saying we did put in deadlines and times there, being thoughtful about all of the things that we're trying to manage, making sure that folks, and this is not just for emergency acquisitions, but for all of the pathways, that they are reflective of the time that it would take to execute on either of those pathways, and that we're thoughtful about the school selection process and how folks are navigating that. But as we sit today, I'm intrigued by what Dr. Sutter offered and would look at how we might make that emergency pathway a little bit clearer to really reflect what a real emergency could be. And I'm balancing that with what I heard from Julie, which is the amount of stress, quite frankly, that the school that is seeking to be acquired is under at the time, or any school that might be requiring them to get all of their ducks in a row to be able to do that. So it is a delicate balance, but I will just say from a staff perspective, we're open to clarifying that. That being said, I think an emergency pathway is important because we cannot predict what might happen, and we do want to have the flexibility to respond to that. But I am also curious about what our panelists have to say about that. I know we spent some time early in the drafting of this thinking about having that, but based on what we've heard to date, how should our stance change, either by what Dr. Sutter offered, but any other perspectives?
I'm happy to elaborate a little bit on this emergency policy. Again, referring back to prior acquisitions that happened in the city, which were all much more like the emergency acquisition policy outlines than like something planned and strategic. One of the things I think is important for the authorizer to consider in this is what is the measure of success? And so I think one of the questions around an emergency acquisition pathway is if a successful transaction is framed around centering students, and will it arrive at a better set of outcomes or more plausibly better set of outcomes than an alternative? So in the case of an emergency acquisition, you might be thinking on something like a closure. This school will close and there's an opportunity for an emergency acquisition. Which one plausibly leaves students in a better position with choices for better access to quality schooling, for choices to a guaranteed pathway to a school that is within the same community or serving a similar mission to the school that needs to close? And I think that becomes an important condition in having an emergency pathway, but also in deciding whether an emergency acquisition versus an outright closure is a better alternative. Because I've beaten this drum before, and I did it when I was on the state board, and I'll do it to anyone who will listen. I think school closures are an essential aspect of the charter school movement. They are known, they are stated, it is something that can and must happen in order for charters to keep their commitment to providing better quality options. However, they're painful. They're painful for everyone involved, for the adults that have to make the choices, for the schools that have to enact them, and for the children and families who experience them. So how do we minimize pain? The emergency acquisition pathway is one option for minimizing the pain of the reality of a school that must close. So I think thinking about the timelines to allow for emergencies to happen when they happen, and thinking about the question of, is this leaving students in a plausibly better off position than an outright closure might, both seem to me important in considering this emergency acquisition policy, but I do think you need it. I think you need it because it has happened in the city and it's likely to happen again.
And just a follow up there, when you're saying considering whether or not the emergency acquisition is right, how does that connect for that moment? How does that connect with the question or the feedback around the timelines around the lottery? How do you see that at play? And do you see that as a factor for determining this might not be the best time? Just curious.
Yeah, I do. So I think that if you think about um, a school that is participating in a renewal or review decision on the timeline that PCSB is committed to, making those decisions before the deadline for my school DC, I hope you don't see an emergency acquisition as part of that. But there are any number of closures in the history of charter schools in DC that were based on financial reasons, some in the early days that were based on fraud or malfeasance. Should something like that arise outside the time period of the My School DC lottery, a true emergency, something that is uncovered or comes up or is unexpected, I think the question of the My School DC lottery might be off the table. And if it's off the table, what's the best pathway that does the most good and the least harm for students? So that to me, I think is the way I'm thinking about the timing there, but I offer that to you all for consideration.
Thank you. David, Julie, want to invite you all to the conversation, then I'll turn it over. I think another board member has a couple more questions.
Part of what I'm thinking about in terms of that timeline, I think Dr. Walker Davis sort of alluded to it. It takes time to actually execute on this. And I think is the assumption that the acquisition or this thing would happen effective July 1? Or, so that's the beginning of the fiscal year. That would be the cleanest. And I don't know how you do it outside of that. So that could create sort of a built-in limitation. February 1 gives 5 months for that whole thing to happen. That doesn't strike me as a lot of time. But I think it's, that might be a question for lawyers and others to think about, like, how much time do we actually need to carry this to do the technical work?
Awesome. Thank you. Vice Chair Sandman. You're on mute, Jim. Okay. Hello? Testing. Okay, go ahead, Treasurer Stanley Beatty.
I was going to say, may I go, Vice Chair Salmon? You're still on mute. Okay, very well. Thank you for indulging me. So I just have a couple other questions. Jessica, thank you for the comments that you just made. I'm going to ask you about the emergency pathway in another way. And Dr. Walker Davis, you close your ears. So could there, Jessica, and the other panelists as well, could there be a path where if PCSB, for example, increased its transparency, increased its communication, increased perhaps the way that we're meeting with LEAs or disseminating information. I'm just saying if you do everything that we're doing times 100, and this is just an example, in that place and time, is there a place where we wouldn't need the emergency acquisition? And I'm not including, and you actually made a really good carve out when you said the thing about fraud and malfeasance. I wouldn't include that because I don't know, in my opinion, if that would be an LEA that would be eligible for any of these pathways. So I take that off the table. But just in terms of the stuff that we've talked about, whether it's academics or financial, if there was increased communication, increased transparency, and perhaps more dissemination of information. And I'm not suggesting we don't do that enough. I'm just saying, is there a world where tightening those practices could put us in a position where the emergency was not needed or less needed? How do you think about that in your head?
Yeah,
Can
I
I
think that's
just
go ahead.
underscore one thing? I think, Carissa, to build on what you're asking,
what would be useful for me is if the panelists could be hypothetically concrete.
about a universe in which it's hard to predict emergencies. Do you know what I mean?
I think so.
I appreciate your ad lib, Leah, but sure, yeah, my question stands.
I'll give it my best shot.
Yeah.
So in a hypothetical universe,
Yep.
Where we have access to
these things,
yep.
Yeah.
And I'll reference a favorite grad school professor who liked to talk about perfect information when she talked about sort of theories of economics. If you had perfect information, could make
That's the world.
Perfectly rational decisions.
Yes.
I would think that indeed you would see that pathway being exceedingly rare. However, even in a perfectly rational economic universe, there are unexpected things. And so I'll harken back to someone mentioned earlier the notion of COVID. I don't know what lays before us as a world. And so there could be some sort of outside force that might result in things that affected the finances of schools, things that affected enrollment patterns of schools, things that affected leases or bonds that schools hold. So any number of things that might even be beyond the purview of the authorizer's transparency of data. Having, and this goes back to something I think Julie really nicely underscored earlier, having a clear, transparent policy on the books for how will we as the authorizer plan to respond in such a hypothetical situation is helpful and healthy for the sector to know what's coming. But to your point, if everything is perfect as it ought to be in transparency, then yeah, I would think that it would be more rare. That's my sense. But David, I think, has even, with a purview of authorizers across the country, may have more insights on that.
Your questions are making me think, whenever a school closes or whenever there's a thing at a school, be it fraud, be it whatever it might be, people look to the authorizer, right? And authorizers look in the mirror, I hope, right? What could we have done differently to prevent this? And a lot of people like to look at authorizers to say, you should have done this, or what could you have done to? And so I think that's kind of what you're suggesting.
What did we miss, right?
What did we miss?
Yes, that's right.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Absolutely. And I don't know if that perfect world could possibly exist where we can't miss something or someone is frankly fraudulent, or adults are adults, right? People are people, and we can't control everything about what they do. And the authorizer, and this gets in part to this charter school movement and this charter school bargain, if you will, around autonomy, right? We cannot have our paws in every single little thing as the authorizer, and so stuff's going to happen. I mean, I wish it wouldn't. I wish it didn't. And we have to continually look in the mirror, and people need to ask us those questions about what might you have missed? What could you have done? And we're not going to catch everything.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And thank you for that. It's interesting, for obvious reasons, the example, Jessica, that you gave about the bond market, that resonates with me probably the most for obvious reasons, right? You're right. I mean, I didn't think about it from that perspective, like something happening in the finance world or whatever, where it's not that we missed it, it's just that the world changed, right? That's actually the perfect example. Thank you for that. That was helpful. So thank you for indulging me. Just two other questions. Juliet, you said something and I wrote it down. You said something about the way, and I'm paraphrasing you, but the way the policy is written, you seem to feel like it positively either defined demand or drew parameters around demand, where you said something about like it did what it needed to do in terms of creating models for this. Like I said, I'm paraphrasing, but I know there was a lot of talk about demand. You specifically made a comment about the policy, in your opinion, the language was appropriate such that it did what it needed to do in prescribing demand. Is that what you were trying to say?
I wouldn't say that the policy prescribes demand. I appreciate the question. I think what I was trying to articulate, perhaps inartfully, is that the policy raises the question of demand.
Okay.
So that it would be very difficult, I think, for this policy to be executed for any given merger or acquisition without consideration of the demand for individual models.
I got it.
Yes.
I got it. Okay. Say more about that. Say why you say what it is in the language that sort of that arrives you to that conclusion.
So two things. I think one is the guiding principles, to be honest, at the very beginning of that policy, I think sets it out, and I don't have those right in front of me right now, but if memory serves, that is part of the guiding principles. And then I think the other piece is in the standards for approval and thinking about whether there are, let's see. Now I have to actually look at the policy. So you're quizzing me, which is great. In the need and demand for the standard for approval, that the applicant is being asked to make a compelling case for why the acquisition improves the ability to meet community needs in the DC education sector. That is the sentence that I cue in on. It's on page 9 of the policy under standard for approval. That's where I sort of anchor this prompt in the policy to the PCSB to look at demand, look at sector needs, look at community needs, and make sure that that information is included in the decision-making process.
Okay. Thank you for that. Actually improves the ability to meet. Okay. And I think I asked this question before, Dr. Walker Davis, in that same section that she just highlighted on page 9, where we say that in compelling case for why the acquisition improves the ability to meet the community. The ability is the LEA's ability. I think I asked this before.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And then I just have one other question, and this comes from also the feedback that we received from the sector. So there was comment about us allowing for like a reprieve, or I guess a hold harmless period after a merger or an acquisition. And we rightly assert that although there's not an automatic pause, we use this language that says that we have our multi-year review and renewal process that provides a timeline through which the merged or acquired LEAs can transition. Dr. Walker Davis, can you just expand upon that? I'm not suggesting that it is enough time or not enough time. I just want to make clear that we speak to the point, and I kind of want to explain what we mean there and highlight the point, if that makes sense.
Sure. So I believe that, well, let me speak to our practice right now. So we have language in our charter goals policy that speaks to what we do for a new school when we're assessing accountability, and what we might do for a school that acquires another school. And there are some thresholds about basically how many students you take in, whether that fundamentally changes your accountability. And so we do have, I know we're not using the whole harmless language, but we have provisions that account for a new school and how we assess them, or if the school fundamentally becomes new because it's acquired a significant student population. So that is envisioned in our, what I would call school accountability policies, and we can make the connection clearer to the two policies so that they understand that, yes, if you are a merged school or you've acquired a significant population, we would analyze your performance differently for some period of time. And I see Hannah came off mute.
Yes,
so.
I'd like to share that just to support what Dr. Walker Davis said. If you look at footnote 5 on page 1, it states exactly what Dr. Walker Davis is sharing, that we will treat a merger like a new LEA as described in the Aspire policy and technical guide, the charter goals policy, their successor policies. We could add language and I think that's also in the acquisition section. And if it's not, we can make sure to be specific there too. Yeah, it's footnote 6, actually. I just went
I
to
was
the
gonna say,
second
it's
page.
not
Yeah.
Okay, not
So,
mine.
so we tried to be responsive to that feedback. I think that's a very fair point that Dr. Wright raised earlier, Dr. White raised earlier tonight.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. So then you will, so I see the existing footnote. So what is the solution? Hannah, you're not saying you're going to do anything additional, or are you saying you're going to clarify the footnote, or what's you're saying the footnote is there?
The footnote is there, and
Okay.
it states that there are some of these other considerations. It's about the number of students you enroll, the establishment of a new campus. So, but if you do meet those thresholds, then yes, that there is some reprieve from from traditional accountability structures.
Okay. Okay. But the point is executing on either the merger or the acquisition pathway in and of itself does not introduce a reprieve or a hold harmless. In and of itself, you would have to meet sort of these other criteria, is what you're saying. You're connecting it to some other policy.
Yes, we're connecting it to the policy that we assess their goal attainment from. And in the past, for example, we have had acquisitions where not all of the students came over. And so fundamentally, the student population of the acquiring school did not change. And so therefore, they don't need a whole harmless compared to another school that took 95% of the students from the acquired school landed in the new school, and their student population fundamentally changed. So therefore, we would not assess the school in the same way that we did previously.
Got it. And is that solely tied to enrollment ceiling, Dr. Walker Davis, or is it something else?
This is to their academic achievement consistent with our either Aspire Now or goal attainment policy, but not their enrollment ceiling.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Vice Chair Sandman. I'm done.
Thank you. I apologize. I had some technical difficulties. Are there other questions from board members?
Yes, I have one question.
Please.
Only one. Hannah or Dr. Walker Davis, we heard public comment about essentially the role of family and caregiver engagement around what's going on with the emergency acquisition. If you all can just speak briefly to sort of your thought process around this and where the responsibility lies, if you will, for caregiver and family engagement, and then to our illustrious panel, if you could speak to sort of how you all are seeing that and whether or not a role plays, which is completely fine as well.
Yeah, I'll ask Hannah to talk about it. We have some experience now.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Family engagement, staff engagement, broad school, surrounding community engagement is paramount to what we view as a successful merger and acquisition. It's part of that standard for approval. We are setting thresholds for what that engagement needs to look like, so that if schools are considering these pathways in the context of long-term, sustainability, efficiency, quality, that they know that these are required elements and what we view to be a successful transition. That's my talking point I will make there, and I will let Dr. Walker Davis jump into.
Yeah, I mean, I think our board knows that this is a part of our ECI, soon to be expansion policy. It's part of other policies that we have, even our charter application policy, where these are new applicants. We're asking them to demonstrate that they've involved the community and how they've done so. Those thresholds would remain going into this process, and we would expect that if you're particularly bringing two school communities together, that there is a desire from the folks in those communities for that to happen, and that we would want to see that articulated in the application process going forward. But I am actually curious to hear what the panelists have to say from different vantage points about where that has shown up successfully, if there's tweaks to our process that we might want to consider, or evidence of what happens when we don't what happens when that is not effectively done in terms of the success of the actual combination of schools.
Yeah, I'll say a couple things. I think all you're saying about sort of the pre-decision or the pre-merger or to show the evidence, it really ties with the need and demand, right? Like if this community is not, if they're going to go to a different school or not stay in the school or whatever, if this it speaks to that. What I'm really interested in is once it gets approved, and what does the communication look like after that? And most authorizers, I don't know about you all, I don't imagine you have direct contact with families. You just, that's the job of the school. And this is probably not for the policy, but in your processes and expectations, once the merger is moving forward, families and staff, absolutely, it's critical. I mean, they have to, you have to, the schools have to demonstrate that they're communicating with families and staff. Absolutely.
I'll just add a couple of things. One, if as we were talking to other authorizers who had pursued mergers or acquisitions across the country, if the number one thing they told us was that one of the schools participating in an acquisition had to be high quality, the second thing they said is that family stakeholder engagement in the process is essential. That was a key point that they raised when we spoke to them about their own experiences. The second thing that's on my mind is that I think this is a place for school leaders to have the same judgment that the PCSB sometimes needs to exert in these kinds of processes, the when and the how of sharing the right information at the right time in the right way with a school community that's going to be deeply affected by whatever comes of the process. I think is an art more than a science, but is important to do and important to think very carefully about. And so in thinking about the standards of approval and the ask on the LEAs applying for a merger or an acquisition to be very careful in their attention to that, be very thoughtful about it, but also exercise some judgment, knowing them being the ones who know their communities the best, is a really important part of the process as well.
I'll add one thought. One of the papers I wrote out of my doctoral research was called Missing from the Room Where It Happens, Parents and Families. Because in the past, in the acquisitions that took place previously, families were most often missing from the conversations about the transactions. I think, again, I want to highlight most of those were done on an emergency basis. So these were quick turnaround, often in an emergency situation. But the folks that I was able to speak to about the experience highlighted the fact that that was a real damaging piece of acquisitions that did not involve families getting to provide input into who would acquire the opportunity. What would that mean for the rights of their children for a future school? So I think especially in the pathways that this policy envisions, where there are longer timelines and schools have the opportunity to engage, I would double down on what both David and Julie said around judgment and the knowing of the community and when that engagement happens. But I think one of the bargains of the charter school movement is that we're giving families more choices. They need to have informed choices. So they need to understand what is happening and make their choices appropriately.
Can I just ask, was it best practice to put the notice to the families in the actual policy? Either Jessica or Julie, is it, or even David, is it best practice to put it in the policy? How and if they would report that back to us or anything as it relates to notification to families?
I don't know that the authorizers we spoke to had actually put it into their policy, but it was definitely a very strong consideration for how they were thinking about their approval.
Okay, thank you.
I did want to just take this opportunity to name, and I'm connecting the dots to what David mentioned, and even Julie, in terms of the authorizer not being as proximate to the school community as the school leaders themselves, but we have strong expectations around that level of engagement. This is also an opportunity to lean into our sector partners who are supporting schools with family engagement and community engagement, stakeholder or relevant party engagement. And I am pleased to see the active engagement of the Charter Alliance offering testimony here, Ed Ford offering testimony here. And there are others like PAVE and others who we hope to be partners in, one, us helping them to understand what this policy allows, but schools leaning into our sector partners to support some of that work. Because we know, and we heard it even in our policy summit, having the policy on the books to facilitate this kind of union is important, and all of the work is happening with the schools in their respective communities to be able to be responsive to it. And so I would hope that this is an opportunity for our partners to also be clear on PCSB's expectations, but to be able to rally and support around schools who are looking to pursue any of these pathways. And we would be happy to continue to engage those folks to better understand what this policy does, and also what it doesn't do and what it doesn't limit in terms of the flexibility that already exists.
Thank you all for that. And Dr. Walker Davis, I think that's a excellent point on there. Just all hands on deck is what I'm hearing. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from board members?
No, I just appreciate all of this, and I want to reiterate how much I appreciate the fellow board members' questions. I feel like having gone around this in a bunch of different angles has been enlightening for me.
Before I turn it back to Dr. Walker Davis to close us out on this section of the agenda tonight, I want to thank Jessica and Julie and David for joining us, for helping us through this process over a period of time, and especially for your presence tonight. It's been very helpful to us to hear your insights and your expertise, and I think it's a great thing for the public to be able to have access to your experience. I also want to ask the staff, in light of the very thoughtful comments we received tonight, to review what we've done here tonight and to be sure that in one way or another we've responded to the comments that we've made. I leave it to you to decide how best to do that, but I think that people gave a lot of thought to what they told us. We heard some very important suggestions. It was very helpful to our discussion and following up tonight. So I think we owe it to the people who took the time to share their questions with us to let them know how we're responding to them. Dr. Walker Davis?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Sandman. And of course, thank you, board members, for the thoughtful discussion and the questions. And especially thank you to our panelists for being available and bringing your multiple perspectives to the conversation. Really enjoyed working with you and preparing for tonight as well. I want to just name, Vice Chair Sandman, that over the next month, we will be reflecting on the feedback that we've heard to date in official public comment, the conversation that we've had tonight, looking at ways that we could enhance our policy and bring back to you a final version for consideration at our January meeting. And has been our past practice, we will summarize all of the comments that we've received to date, how we've responded in the policy draft. And so we'll bring all of that perspective together for the vote that is scheduled at our January 26th meeting. I also just want to say thank you to all of the folks who have shared thoughts with us formally or informally, how engaged our community has been on this. And just to underscore that we see this as an opportunity to expand options, to expand pathways, not as a limitation. And there is that delicate balance between making sure that we're transparent about our expectations, but leaving room for that authorizer judgment. So appreciate how this board has engaged and look forward to bringing you a final version to react to at our January meeting.
Thank you. And thank you, Hannah, for all your hard work on this. And this has been a labor of love, we know. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Now move to the next item on our agenda, which is a discussion of a school year 2026-27 grace and acclimation period for PK through 8 and high school Aspire frameworks. I'll ask Kirsten James, Director of School Quality and Accountability, to present on the proposed grace and acclimation period for Aspire due to the change in state assessments. We're only discussing this tonight. There will be no vote tonight. Kirsten.
Thank you, Vice Chair Salmon. Hello, my name is Kirsten James Floyd. I'm a director in the School Performance Department. This evening, I will present the details of a proposed grace and acclimation period to be implemented in school year 2026-27 in response to a new state assessment, and then lead a brief discussion with the board. Slide. In today's meeting, you will learn about this proposed grace and acclimation period. We aim for you to understand the purpose of introducing a grace and acclimation period, who it impacts, and what staff proposes DCPCSB do and not do during this time. DCPCSB has a long history of academic accountability. Under the School Reform Act, DCPCSB holds schools accountable to the terms of their charters. In 2010, DCPCSB introduced a standardized framework measuring school quality. This tool, known as the Performance Management Framework, or PMF, expanded over time to accommodate the various school types in our portfolio, like schools serving adult students and alternative schools. There are 3 instances in this timeline that illustrate when, how, and why DCPCSB modified its approach to academic accountability due to factors beyond our control. A little more than 10 years ago, the Office of the State Superintendent of Education, or OSSE, introduced a new state assessment. In response, DCPCSB adjusted how PMF outcomes for that year were used in high-stakes decision-making. In 2020, in response to the disruption of the pandemic and its aftermath, DCPCSB adopted the COVID-19 impact policy and the subsequent charter goals policy, which temporarily offers multiple pathways for schools to demonstrate goal attainment as we move toward full implementation of our revised accountability system, Aspire. We are now faced with another state assessment transition in school year 26-27. The following presentation will outline how DCPCSB staff propose modifying academic oversight in response to the new state assessment. In October 2025, OSSE announced it will launch DC CAPE 2.0, an updated statewide assessment for English language arts and math in school year 26-27 for grades 3 to 8 and high school. While OSSE will compare results from school year 25-26 DC CAPE, the current statewide assessment, to school year 26-27 DC CAPE 2.0 outcomes, it will not calculate statewide assessment growth measures for school year 26-27. Further, school year 26-27 proficiency results may vary as new scales and cut scores are established. Consequently, state assessment data will be unavailable or potentially unreliable for most schools evaluated under the DCPCSB's pre-K to 8 and high school Aspire frameworks. The absence of valid growth data will impact nearly half of the available Aspire points for some campuses, limiting Aspire's ability to fulfill its guiding principle of rewarding high levels of growth. State assessment proficiency rate measures make up another 10 to 26 Aspire points for most schools evaluated by the pre-K to 8 and high school frameworks. This particular issue does not impact schools evaluated under Aspire's pre-K only framework, adult education framework, alternative accountability framework, or pre-K to 8 early childhood sub-framework. DCPCSB will conduct typical accountability as planned for these schools. In response to this state assessment transition, DCPCSB staff proposes implementing a grace and acclimation period for school year 2026-27 for the impacted schools. This grace and acclimation period means that DCPCSB would not consider school year 26-27 state assessment performance in any high-stakes decision-making, including charter reviews, renewals, and goal attainment. But DCPCSB would consider performance on all other available academic and non-academic measures as supplemental evidence to support high-stakes decision-making, including charter reviews and renewals. Regarding reviews and renewals, DCPCSB will not determine charter goal attainment for school year 26-27 for any impacted school that has adopted Aspire as its goals. However, DCPCSB will calculate and publicly report Aspire scores and levels for schools not impacted by this assessment change. For school year 26-27 performance, DCPCSB will not calculate or publicly report Aspire summative scores and levels for impacted schools, but DCPCSB will publicly report Aspire measure level performance for the impacted schools. Here is a chart showing the impact of the grace and acclimation period on reviews and renewals by cohort. For example, the 25-26 cohort refers to schools that are subject to review or renewal in this current school year. They are not yet impacted by the new assessment. The schools subject to review or renewal in school year 27-28 are the first impacted by the DC CAPE 2.0 transition. The impact is not immediate, and for each year that the grace and acclimation period is in play, there are 4 years of academic data to inform any high-stakes decision-making. So why introduce this grace and acclimation period? This grace and acclimation period aims to ensure fairness and consistency, support a smooth transition to the new assessment, protect schools from penalties, allow schools and the sector to adjust, and maintain the integrity of DCPCSB's oversight. We also know that making this proposal and having our board vote on it in advance of the school year to which it applies provides transparency and gives schools a clear understanding of what's to come. Slide. Last month, DCPCSB staff shared this proposal with the pre-K to 8 and high school Aspire working groups and the LEA advisory group. Generally, school leaders responded positively to the proposal. They appreciated the alignment with what DCPCSB did back in 2014-15 when the state transitioned to PARC. School leaders reminded us that clear and timely communication is critical. And they also requested that we consider allowing schools the option of using strong school year 26-27 DC CAPE 2.0 proficiency outcomes as supplemental information in charter reviews and renewals. DCPCSB staff, can you go back one? DCPCSB staff also discussed the proposed approach with the Aspire Technical Advisory Group, or TAG. TAG members said the grace and acclimation period is technically sound, but will require adaptive behaviors to support its successful implementation. So what schools can expect in the coming months, DCPCSB staff will maintain constant communication with schools regarding the grace and acclimation period, Aspire reporting, Aspire adoption, and the next Aspire policy and technical guide, as outlined in the Wednesday bulletin. We will also be meeting monthly with each of the framework-specific Aspire working groups. The pre-K only and adult groups will begin meeting in January, and all the groups will meet through May. DCPCSB will engage with school leaders at the Charter Leaders Meeting in January. We will update the Aspire FAQ document available on our website in January as well, ahead of our first public release of Aspire measure data in March. And the deadline for PMFS goals schools to communicate their decision about adopting Aspire as goals on or before April 1st, 2026. I am sticking around for your questions.
Board members, are there questions?
Thank you for that, Kirsten. And again, your tremendous work on all things Aspire and now the GAP policy and all the things. So thank you so much. Would love for you to speak to any other approaches that were considered, and then finally, what ultimately led you to this approach, if at all? Yeah.
Yeah, so after learning about the DCK 2.0 assessment transition, staff elevated 3 major decision points. So we thought about calculating Aspire outcomes, publicly reporting on school performance, and determining goal attainment for reviews and renewals. Given the impact the absence of growth data has on most of the pre-K to 8 sub-frameworks in the high school framework, DCPCSB staff assess the pros and cons of various options, such as using an average of prior year's growth data, temporarily replacing the state assessment growth measures with alternative growth measures such as NWEA MAP or iReady, or redistributing the growth points to other measures within the frameworks. Staff ultimately decided to recommend the approach that most aligns with past practices and maintains some degree of continuity year over year. If we were to redistribute points or introduce like a 1-year measure, it would further complicate our reporting and also the public's understanding of what we are reporting on. With respect to public reporting, staff recognized an opportunity to report on 26-27 performance in a manner similar to how we're reporting on school year 24-25 performance. In March 2026, DCPCSB will publish school year 24-25 Aspire data without displaying scores or levels. We call this measure level reporting. Staff recommends we do the same for school year 26-27 performance in the absence of the growth measures, enabling the public to at least see all available measures, even though Aspire scores won't be calculated for impacted schools. With respect to goal attainment, staff began with past precedent and considered various forms of hold harmless provision, such as modified accountability only if a school underperforms or just for all schools.
Got it. Thank you.
Treasurer Stanley Beatty.
Thank you, Vice Chair Salmon. Kirsten, a couple questions. Could you,
Yeah.
so the point that you just made about I think you said the measure specific reporting, is that what you called it for 26-27? So ultimately what you're saying is that we would still report out what an LEA achieved on the measures that make up Aspire, but you wouldn't do a cumulative score. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. And that's what we're doing this year for 24-25. And it's also similar to what we did in 2014-15 when we transitioned to Park.
Okay. And in practice, that looks like what? It looks like literally publishing the metrics?
It looks like so, yes. And it looks like, for example, re-enrollment, right? It will say this is re-enrollment. This calculates the percentage of students that are not in terminal grades that were at the school last year that enrolled again this year. Here's the percentage of students that re-enrolled, period. It doesn't calculate points for Aspire. It doesn't, in order to roll up into the overall score, it just says your re-enrollment rate was 87%.
Okay. Give me that same example, Kirsten, for proficiency, for example.
So the tricky part about proficiency is is that it would be a new measure, and we are proposing to still report on it. And
so back up, what do you mean when you say it would be a new measure?
so it's the
You mean under
proficiency rate
Aspire?
is for the new test. No, the proficiency rate is for this new state assessment.
Gotcha.
And so we don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know how consistent or not it will be with a school's previous performance.
Yep.
And we are not proposing to utilize floors and targets in order to earn points, right? Because we're saying we're not going to do a summative score. So we don't have to anchor it in that way. And so we would just say proficiency rate, here's for your student groups, your economically disadvantaged students got a proficiency rate on the state assessment in ELA or English language arts of 47%. Your not economically disadvantaged students got a proficiency rate of 49%, and so on. It would just be, yeah, the student groups and their outcomes.
Okay. And when you said that it would be a new number, what you're saying is it's new because it's this CAPE 2.0. It's not the old, but not new to mean unknown. Just new to
No,
being different.
just new to mean different, and it's a different assessment. And so there might be some, folks have some expectations around how schools perform, and there are uncertainties that come with a new assessment. I will say there are like kind of nuances about CAPE 2.0 that are different than previous Cape. So like we're moving from having five performance levels to four performance levels. So that's like one seemingly small thing, but it also affects how people interpret the results. Ultimately, we are still reporting on proficiency. So excuse me, what percentage of your students met um, expectations for grade level content
Mhm.
that year.
Okay. Okay. And then just a point of clarification, when you said we're going from five, you said we're going from five different, I guess like five strata to four strata. Are you saying that's under CAPE 2.0, or what did you mean when you said, okay.
Yeah,
So
the Smarter Balanced Assessment only has four performance levels, whereas Park had five performance levels.
okay, you're not talking about Aspire there. You're
No.
talking about, okay, got it. Okay. And then I had one other question for you. So on the slide deck, you had a slide or language under a slide that talked about flexibility. And I tried to write it down. It said using CAPE 2.0 outcome to use outcomes LEAs are asking for flexibility to use
Yeah.
the outcomes as supplemental information in reviews and renewals.
Right.
Tell me what that looks like in practice, because what it sounds like is you don't want to use the data if it hurts them, but you do want the opportunity to use the data if it helps them. And
That's
tell me,
yeah.
what is that what we're doing?
Well, so the way the proposal is written, so I said this when I was presenting to the working groups last month that we are erring on the side of caution by making this proposal. And what if everything turns out great, right? What if we shift to this new assessment and the kids do amazing on it and everyone shows up really well? By implementing this grace and acclimation period, we are essentially saying nothing happened during that year. And so even if it's good, you don't necessarily have the option of that showing up in your review and renewal report, right? Um, and so that was one of the things that came up from schools was like, well, what if it's good and we come up for review and maybe we struggled in other years and this one year that's our grace and acclimation period year, we did really well, but it's not going to show up in the report. Um, and something that we have been discussing is what it would look like practically speaking. I think one thing that comes up is there is a difference between a school that is up for review and a school that's up for renewal. When a school is up for review, um, they can present supplemental information that can inform a high stakes decision from the board, and it can be considered at the board's discretion, right? When a school is up for renewal, you have a lot less ability to consider those additional information because it's pretty cut and dry that it's like either they met the goals or didn't, and that's the decision that's made. And so in a practical sense, if a school is up for review and they feel like they need an additional push, right? Like they may have a year or two that weren't so great, but they know they rocked out on the new state assessment, they would be able to either um, we provide schools the opportunity to respond to their review report. They would be able to offer that. They would be able to share that in the board meeting for their review when they come up for review. And it would be an opportunity for them to publicly share information that wouldn't otherwise have been made public because we're not necessarily qualifying the data in our reporting. And so they would say, we did really great. It was, in the top whatever, or however they would present it. And unfortunately, for schools that are up for renewal, the options would be limited to include this information for your consideration.
Yeah. So that's helpful and for obvious reasons, but you should just state it. It's less we have less flexibility at renewal because the SRA imposes what it imposes, right? So
Correct.
I want to finish that thought. So it's an interesting concept. I understand why it's there. I'm not gonna spend too much time on it tonight, but I would say the devil is in the detail. I want to understand what that looks like from a practice perspective. I'll say
Right.
for me personally, as a board member, I struggle when there are these things that are introduced that we say we're doing for the purposes of flexibility, but perhaps may look inconsistent when it comes to other LEAs. Because, for example, you're introducing it and you're using it because it helps the LEAs. And I get that. That sort of goes along that same vein of you use it if it helps them and you don't if it doesn't. Oh, if you don't, if it don't, you don't if it doesn't. But at the same time, I would say my sort of thoughts around that would be, is that coming, is the use of that flexibility or that supplemental information, is that coming as a request to the board? Is that coming baked into the recommendation? Is that coming to us by way of us sort of talking about it and socializing it and agreeing that we would use it? Or is the practice that it comes at us as board members in some other way?
Yeah.
And so those are just my high level thoughts as it relates to that. And I'll earmark that and hope that we can come back to it when the time is right.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think that is really important to elevate. We did list it as feedback that we got from schools. We have previously had, I believe in the COVID-19 impact policy, we had instance written into that policy was that we would share information about schools only if it helped schools during our COVID years. And so we have implemented that type of approach before. And I think that how we include it, to your point, like if, a school wants to include it in their review and we have some review reports from that year that have the data in it and some that don't, that inconsistency might be confusing for our broader audience. And so we would need to be more explicit about how that information might be introduced, whether it's in an appendix or whether it's the school submits it on their own. And there are a bunch of different ways that we might include it, but we should definitely be clear about how that information could be considered and how it would get to you.
Yeah. And how we are supposed to consider it, right? Kirsten,
Right.
like the weight that you're asking us to give it,
Right.
and we're supposed to consider it in our decision making. That's what I'm saying. Confusing and inconsistent for the sector, but even for me as a board member, I want to be clear. Yeah.
100%.
Okay.
Other questions? I have one.
No, I
Kirsten.
just appreciate the, oh, sorry, Vice Chair Sandman. I was simply going to reiterate my appreciation that we can't anticipate everything. And per the previous discussion, the navigating trickily, the tricky navigation of both wanting to be transparent and offer some consistency, clarity for LEAs and the school communities, while also being able to have some agility and be able to be responsive. Thank you for walking us through this tonight, and thank you for the questions.
Of course.
Kirsten, I have a question.
Yes.
Use of terms like or acronyms like GAP and use of terms like GRACE might give the impression that in 26, 27, or in some other year, everybody gets a pass. We're not going to be making high stakes decisions. Everybody's going to be reviewed positively. Everybody's going to be renewed. And that's not true, as I understand it. Can you confirm that that's not, that we are going to continue in every year and not skip a year, that we are going to continue to do reviews and renewals and make high stakes decisions? And then and you're nodding, so the answer is yes, right?
Confirmed. We are not skipping anything.
And can you just articulate how we are going to do that, notwithstanding the fact that we won't be using this information from the 26-27 year?
Right. So on the slide that showed the review and renewal cohorts, we are post-pandemic and we are moving into having a full 5 years of data, which is amazing. And in the years that this grace and acclimation period will be in play, for each of those years, there are full 4 years of data for you to consider in these high stakes decisions. So, and this is where some of the concern from schools came up, right? If you have one less year of data, then the remaining 4 years carry a lot of weight. But that's kind of the reality of making a proposal like this. You ultimately are and why we are considering this opportunity for schools to show supplemental information, because the 4 years that you do have are the ones that you will use to make the decisions about continuance and renewals. But you won't be, we have been growing into having more than 2 years of data, which is what we had 2 years ago, or last year even. And so we will be beyond that, right? We have had this experience of utilizing limited number of years of data to make continuance and renewal decisions. And at that point, we will have 4 of the 5 years of a review period, which is significant.
Way better than we've had for a while.
Right.
And I want to just put an even finer point on your question, Vice Chair Sandman, which is we are giving great grace and acclamation for the change in the assessment and determinations associated with that new assessment, not from our general oversight of schools, not from our general review or renewal decisions, but how that year is included in the review and renewal period for the purposes of goal determination related to the state assessment impact. That does not mean that everything stops. We are continuing our full oversight of schools, and this is a consistent practice when there are huge changes to state assessment. You will find that in pretty much every jurisdiction that does education accountability, but our work continues, and more importantly, Aspire implementation continues even with this change in the state assessment.
And it only applies to the schools that are impacted. So we're not extending the grace and acclimation period to all schools. It is any school that serves grades 3 or higher. And so that's most schools under the pre-K to 8 framework. That's all of our high schools, but that does not include our pre-K only schools. It does not include our adult education framework schools, does not include our alternative accountability schools. None of those schools use the state assessment for evaluative purposes. And so they would not be, their accountability or our oversight of those schools would be typical as planned.
Thank you. That's all very clear. Kirsten, what are the next steps and when do you plan to bring the grace and acclimation period to the board for a vote?
Well, thank you for asking. It will be, we will be codifying the details of this proposal with the Aspire policy and technical guide for school year 26-27. That'll open for public comment in April and your vote will be in June. Any additional details that might come up will be in the next iteration of the charter goals policy, which we will also be developing and working on next year. But the immediate transition will all be in the Aspire policy and technical guide in April.
So this will be included in that for the board vote in April?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for a very clear and outstanding presentation.
Thank you.
Next item, I'd like to yield the floor to Treasurer Carissa Stanley Beatty.
Thank you, Vice Chair Sandman. As you know, DCPCSB is responsible for monitoring and evaluating the financial health of every public charter LEA. During this portion of our monthly meeting, staff will share updates on financial oversight activities, including updates to the financial monitoring list, citations of fiscal concern, and updates to ongoing financial corrective action plans. Staff may also use this time to offer deeper insights into the work that they do every day. And so with that introduction, I'll now turn it over to Will Henderson, our Chief Operating Officer, for this month's financial update.
Good evening, Treasurer Stanley Beatty and members of the board. Thanks for allowing me an opportunity, as always, to touch in briefly on the financial health of our schools. Our Finance Committee has not met since October 30th. However, we do have a meeting scheduled for December 11th this week. Since its November 17th board meeting, DCPCSB has made the following changes to our financial monitoring list. On November 30th, KIPP DC Public Charter School was removed from the financial monitoring list because of their successful completion of its Financial Corrective Action Plan, or their FCAP, through its entire term. Additionally, as we opened our meeting tonight, Dr. Walker Davis shared that on December 4th of just this week, Capital Village PCS, which was on an FCAP, informed DCPCSB that it has voted to voluntarily relinquish its charter. That is effective at the end of this school year, 25-26. DCPCSB received Capital Village's relinquishment notice after publishing the agenda for tonight's meeting, and consequently, DCPCSB will read the school's relinquishment into the record as a procedural action during next month's public meeting. Otherwise, we have not issued any citations of fiscal concern since November 17th, since the November 17th board meeting. And so that concludes my updates for us tonight.
So thank you for that, Will. Vice Chair Salmon, if I may just ask a couple questions and points of clarification. It's great news that KIPP has completed its FCAP. That's fantastic. Can you talk to us not specifically about KIPP, but just talk to us and elaborate how in this case and hopefully in future cases, our oversight and monitoring has worked successfully, where a school works its way through our oversight process, potentially culminating on the FCAP and then successfully completing the FCAP. What does that look like? Do they go back to the monitoring list, or have they finished the FCAP and they're now done with that and they're just now treated as a regular financial monitoring, the way that we would normally do, if that makes sense?
Oh yeah, no, it makes great sense. So, I mean, this is FCAPs are no small feat for our staff or for the school themselves. So the design of our FCAPs are designed to point an LEA towards financial health. Something has occurred that says that they are either not economically viable, or there's some concerns of mismanagement, or there's a concern with gap. Those are the three pieces of the SRA that tell us what we need to do regarding financial oversight. And so an FCAP is designed for us to offer deeper transparency about the work that we will be doing to provide stricter oversight, and inevitably a path for the school to get back towards acceptable and appropriate financial health. To get onto an FCAP, you typically are, unless something super severe and fast has occurred, you're on the monitoring list. So our scrutiny and engagement has already evolved from the school. And if the school's financial health deteriorates, you move to an FCAP, and we plot that corrective action plan together. In the corrective action plan work, though, it is important for staff and for our board to have assurances that the school is in fact healthy again. So an FCAP is not, while the way it operates typically is a stair step up in terms of the amount of scrutiny that staff place on the school, the amount of oversight we provide, it is designed so that it is not a stair step back down. This in this particular case, KIPP has shown financial health for some season already, and we have assurances not just that they've checked all of our early boxes, but they have shown consistency with that. Our FCAPs are designed that way, and the other ones that we've engaged on with this current board over the last couple of years, all help provide us assurances that not only have they reached financial health, but they can sustain it. So, in short, when FCAPs are time bound, and so there's a clear date that not just metrics, but a date, a timeline that um, it's bound within. And so the upon the completion of that date, again, we've had significant communication with these LEAs. They remove all the way back into a financial good standing um, mark. They don't stair step back down to the monitoring list. They're on in good standing.
Perfect. And then, Will, I think I've asked this before, but just for the good of the order, when you say FCAPs have a time period, is it always 5 years? Is it always 6 years? Or do you prescribe the time period to the specific LEA, determining whatever the KFIs or whatever we're trying to achieve, you would make that specific to the time frame?
Certainly specific. There's no always. I mean, I think when there's no prescriptive financial despair, think about any normal person. We could both have financial challenges. One could be about a huge amount of debt, one could be about poor planning, and one could be about misbehavior sort of, and so you to for an organization like a school to move back towards financial health, whatever has caused them to deteriorate is what the FCAP is going to be based on, and that's going to be very personalized. So the FCAP will address that, and the time bound of that FCAP will speak to what we believe is a reasonable path. These are, I don't want to diminish the challenges that an LEA feels when they are experiencing an FCAP, because they're no small feats, but they are not, the spirit of them are not gotcha. The spirit is transparency and operate like pointing towards a clear path towards this is what we are telling you it will take for you to be a financial healthy institution, inevitably in service of your students.
Perfect. Thank you, Will. I just have one other question and I'll turn it over to my colleagues. So we heard tonight that Capitol Village has made the very challenging and meaningful decision to voluntarily relinquish their charter. One of the things that came up tonight when we were talking about mergers and acquisitions is the importance of communication with families and the community and making sure that folks know what's going on at the LEA. Tell me what Capitol Village has done, if we know, and to the extent that you know, to communicate its current status with its families and students to date.
Yeah. It is a great question, and I have been in contact myself with Capitol Village. They're taking that very seriously. They have communicated with their families already. They began communicating this information to their community shortly after they shared this challenging news with us. It was a priority for them, and one of the things that led them to this decision was the lottery and helping their students get the opportunity to fully participate in the experience of choice here in DC. So as Dr. Warren Davis said earlier tonight, their students were able to attend the EdFest from this past weekend and this upcoming EdFest as well, which for those of you listening that don't know, that is the kind of the expo where school families can go and learn more specifically from the schools all in one place. So they are in communication with their families, and I know that they are working hard to hold the hands of their families in the coming season throughout the next enrollment process, certainly immediately and also into the winter. I also want to make a note that that's also a part of our work, Treasurer. Our work is to keep tabs on these students and to keep tabs on the schools. They share their communiques with us. We offer them feedback for, clarity, and we seek information to know and pay attention to where these students are ending up and making sure they at least, have the families have the information they need to do the best thing for their children. So communication and partnership with the families is a priority for Capital Village and also for PCSB.
For the staff. Yeah, thank you for that, Will. Vice Chair Salmon, I just wanted to make a point that actually Jessica Sutter raised tonight that resonated with me. School closures are painful. We don't ever want them to happen. They are disruptive. And that is clear and evident. Although I will say, and she said it better than I will say it, as a part of the charter world and the charter sector, they are a pathway, and they are sometimes necessary. And when they are done appropriately and managed the way that they should be, they don't have to be maximum disruptive. They can be minimally disruptive, and we can all work together. So I appreciate the work that we've done. Will, I know there has been a lot of energy and resources put into working with Capital Village, not only from our staff, but also vice versa from the LEA to us. It has been quite a long road, and I know that that staff will continue on dispositioning appropriately. So thank you for the report. You're on mute, Vice Chair.
Fellow board members, any questions? I have a request, Will, for the benefit of the people in our audience who aren't familiar with our acronyms. Could you just explain what an FCAP is and what a KFI is?
Yep. Thanks for holding me and others to that, Vice Chair. And the FCAP stands for a Financial Corrective Action Plan, and it is one of the tools that we have in place to escalate oversight and accountability for LEAs that are schools that are experiencing financial distress. So we have a handful of tools that we do, and we're working to strengthen and clarify those in this season. But an FCAP or Financial Corrective Action Plan is one of those tools. A KFI stands for Key Financial Indicator, and these are commonly used financial metrics that allow my team and I to understand or probe on the financial health of our schools. No one KFI, Key Financial Indicator, indicates complete truth about anything. And so we have a menu of key financial indicators that we use to ascertain the types of questions that we need to do to learn about a school. As you can imagine, we don't know everything all the time. Our schools share information with us quarterly, and they share audited information with us only annually. And so these indicators help indicate to us where we should focus our attention, which schools need more scrutiny or, owe us more information to assure that they have the financial resources to serve the students that they have signed up to serve.
Could you give a quick example of a key financial indicator that everybody might be able to understand?
Sure. The one that we spend the most time and kind of starting a lot of our analysis with would be days of cash on hand, Vice Chair. And so days of cash on hand is a math equation that tells us how many, given the amount of cash in the bank that you have right now, how many more, if all your cash dried up at this moment, how many days could your entity continue on? And that changes all year long. You get your, third quarter revenue installment this year, you all of a sudden have a lot more cash on hand. And so we look at the budgeted cash on hand. So how how many, at the first day of the fiscal year, how many days of cash on hand you expect to have on the last day of the fiscal year. We'd look at the checkpoints at midpoints through the year to see how you're measuring towards that. So that is kind of the, if we talked a little bit earlier tonight about weights, that's the KFI or key financial indicator that is probably weighted the most, at least in our initial assessments for our schools. And others offer a different level of interest and complexity. But we work together with this menu of KFIs or key financial indicators to understand the type of oversight we need to provide for our schools.
Thank you. That's a very helpful example. Thank you, Treasurer Stanley Beatty and Will, for your presentation and for your very helpful explanations. Next, we will vote on the consent calendar. Would any board member like to remove an item from the calendar for further discussion or state a recusal for the record? If not, I'll entertain a motion on the consent calendar.
I move to approve all items on the consent calendar.
Second.
Not sure I heard a second.
I said second, Vice Chair.
Can you call the roll?
Very good. Vice Chair Sandman, Treasurer Stanley Beatty. I didn't hear. I didn't hear you. Can you hear me?
By you, do you mean me?
Yeah, well, it was me and you, but yes.
Oh, okay. Yes, I'm an I.
Thank you so much.
I thought I said it. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Tech is doing what tech does. Board Member Crucy.
Aye.
And Vice Chair Sandman, I am an aye as well.
Thank you. The consent agenda is approved. The items on the agenda are approved. Is there any new business? Colleagues, I'll now entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn the December 8th, 2025 board meeting.
Second. Okay, I'll go right into it. All right. Vice Chair Sandman.
Aye.
Treasurer Stanley Beatty.
Aye.
Board Member Crucy.
Aye.
And Vice Chair, I am an aye as well.
Thank you. We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for a great discussion tonight, and happy holidays to everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Walker Davis. Good night.